On August 27th, 1847, John Sutter wrote in the daily logbook that was kept here in the clerk's office at Sutter's Fort, made a contract and entered in partnership with Marshall, James Marshall, for a sawmill to be built on the American Fork. This was a contract that was written up by John Bidwell, the head clerk here in his office, and he later stated in his memoirs, "I wrote a contract between Sutter and Marshall to build the mill. Sutter was to furnish the means, Marshall was to build and run the mill and have a share of the lumber for his compensation." The reason that a sawmill was initiated was to help meet the demand of lumber here in California, especially here at Sutter's Fort. And a lot of this was to provide lumber to build a potential town that was called Sutterville, where today William Land Park and the Sacramento Zoo is. This town of Sutterville was surveyed by John Bidwell and Lansford Hastings in February 1846. Yes, that Lansford Hastings who wrote The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, the same book that inspired the Donner Party to take the infamous Hastings Cutoff. Construction of the mill began shortly after Sutter and Marshall had made this contract. The location was determined a month prior by James Marshall, the head carpenter at the fort, and Nero, who was a Miwok guide and also a vaquero at the fort. The sawmill was going to be built roughly 40 miles east of here from Sutter's Fort in a place that the Nisenan native people called Coloma, on the land inhabited by the Yalesumney Nisenan village. This area is known today as Coloma on the South Fork of the American River. Now, why the town of Sutterville? The Sacramento Valley was expected to have an increase of immigration as California had become a United States territory after the United States military seized control of California during the Mexican-American War. Now, why was the sawmill 40 miles away from Sutter's Fort? Well, this is an example of the majority of the trees in this area. Valley oak. They did not grow very tall like pine trees in the Sierra foothills. Also, there was already a lot of these trees being cleared out of this area, as these trees were being cut down to make things like building materials, for firewood, for charcoal in the blacksmith shop. Oak was in such high demand here at the fort that there was even people's rolls here just to cut down trees to make charcoal. The clear cutting of oak in this area, coupled with agricultural expansion on a massive scale. John Sutter didn't just have a few head of cattle, he had over 10,000 by the mid-1840s. All of this massive scale led to large environmental change in this area and major change for many native groups, as this area forced many native groups to leave this area for survival, for looking for resources, and other villages being forced to rely on Sutter's Fort for food and other resources. The sawmill will only further change not only the Sacramento Valley, but California as a whole. Using a labor force of former U.S. Army soldiers from the Mormon Battalion, which was a group that served during the Mexican-American War and had not traveled back to Utah yet, and also Nisenan native people from local villages such as the Yalesumney, Marshall oversaw the construction of the sawmill that was nearing operational by mid-January 1848. Of course, we all know, as the story goes, James Marshall found gold at the sawmill on January 24th, 1848, and 4 days later will bring that gold here to Sutter's office in the central building at Sutter's Fort. They try to keep it secret for a couple weeks until word gets out and the gold rush begins.